from my trip. And went into a random bookstore for the first time in quite a while. Actually, I haven't been getting physical books that often lately, aside from like the game books and like art books. But as far as regular reading goes, it's been really quite a while since I bought any myself. So I thought I'd go through them really quick. So first of all, this, and like the bookstore, it was very nice. It was really funny. Because as I'm sure you know, Dr. Collier, and she'll go through all the books she's found in bookstores, and a lot of them, and I guess unless you really looked, or it to me is just like these wouldn't be really presented well. But in this one, it was like I was just seeing all of her books all over the place. So I don't know, I really enjoyed that. But yeah, it was quite a nice store. I really enjoyed the selection. It was quite a small store. But yeah, so this one, I haven't read these myself. I mainly bought this as a gift for my brother. I did see the movie. I quite enjoyed the movie. But yeah, it's also just like a really great cover. So they had these pretty close to the door, and I'd been meaning to pick them up, but yeah, in the digital store they were also $19, and that's just too much if you're getting a book digitally. There's no really reason for that. So I'd been wanting to get these in paper, in print, since yes, Dr. Collier also mentioned these. I believe she said these were the most terrifying books she's ever read. I think there are sort of more that go off of these now, but these were like the main ones. They did have one in the store, but since I was still traveling, I sort of held myself back. And then finally, I'd only ever recently learned that Brahm wrote books. I'm unsure though. I think some of his are illustrated by himself. I'm unsure if this one is, or if he just did the cover art for it. Quite interesting chapter headings. Okay, and then there's some. Oh, that is quite a sight. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to that as well. So I decided against. Well, we might still do it, but I was not in the mood for to try and continue Daggerheart today, since I wasn't sure how I'd be on for time and didn't want to have to pressure myself to rush through a section. And so thought we'd take a look at this. Now this is by a person who runs a blog called 70s Sci-Fi Art. And you also have him to thank for us going through the last 3 books that we did, because I think it's in response to a question that somebody asked him, hey, your blog's really great and all, where would I find a similar one for fantasy art? And so he pointed to her blog, and she had also just come out with one. I think the other 2 books were from a few years back. So I also picked up her books, since he was claiming, it was all in a similar quality to what he was running. But yeah, this came out, I believe, in the middle of last year. So I feel like the format of this book is going to make it a bit difficult to look at. Also, the layout. It's from the bits I previewed, it's a very text-heavy layout, and many of the images are quite small, quite a lot smaller than we're used to. But for now, we've got these nice full-page spreads. Not sure where that happened there. Issue, but normally it's quite stable. I was worried I'd lost power again there, but that does not seem to be the case. I think this is from one of the, well, not originally, but he has a series of that he runs on the blog. I think it's every week, every Friday maybe, but a bit different, like animals. Oh, and there's nice little things from so the end papers. All of Earth bears witness to the violent destruction of a spaceship on Dean Ellis's striking 1979 paperback cover to projections by Stephen Robinette. Ellis was not credited within the book, an industry practice all too common at the time. That must be this one. That's a curious ordering. Also, on the end papers front, we have Trantor, View from the Top of the Luxor Hotel by Angus McKee for the 1979 art book Alien Landscapes. And then the previous spread is Bruce Pennington's 1974 cover to A.E. Van Vought's The World of Null A. Is quintessential 70s sci-fi art, detailed scenery, bold color choices, and a lone witness facing away, encouraging the viewer to put themselves in their shoes. Rick Steinbach's love of art and science fiction was matched by a love for marine life, so it's no wonder he combined them all in a thought experiment. What would a pressure suit for a bottlenose dolphin look like? It would take a water filtration system that could handle a large amount of skin being shed, a sonar to radar system to make space echolocation possible, and manipulators for dexterity. The March 1980 cover to Future Life magazine displayed Sternbach's proposal. Today he tells me he wouldn't recommend it given some of the things done to marine mammals over the decades, but it was still a fun sci-fi concept. Now, I should say, this was a bit of although I greatly enjoyed it on its own terms, this blog was sort of a disappointment for me, as for the reason I'd sort of gotten into it is there was this magazine. I believe they handed it out my mom's work because it had covered some things they were working on, namely the ion engine, and I just remembered it having all this really amazing art. Like the cover was it's sort of like a Martian lander, but then you had like Lunar Hotel, all these ships, and like the main story was like sort of just this guy going to Mars and sort of a slice of life of just going through his day, sort of, and on the trip. But I'd always, I hadn't been able to find it, and so I'd been trying to figure it out, but I thought the name of the magazine was Planetary Expeditions, but that must have been more of like theming of the issue, and so I've never been able to figure out what magazine it was, which I would have thought would have been easy for several reasons. Because it was like a full gloss, and I don't think there were that many, especially in the genre, publicizing back then. And so you would have thought that it would have stood out from that standpoint. But yeah, I haven't been able to figure it out. I had seen one or two of the pieces I remember in the blog, but I wasn't able to figure out because it could couldn't find any of their records actually being used, but I know there were a couple of Robert McCall pieces in there. But yeah, so I mainly got into this blog because that is one thing that he'll have all these book covers and tell you what cover it was used on, but yeah, it never came up, and yeah, so that was sort of a great disappointment to me that I've still never been able to figure that out, despite combing through his archives back to the very beginning, which was quite an effort. Time Beyond Worlds, just a thought. Oh, and this intro, I believe they said, is written by Vincent D. Fate. I trust you'll forgive me the indulgence of juxtaposing the words of this book's title for my opening remarks. The late great theoretician and cosmologist Stephen Hawking stated in A Brief History of Time that the past, present, and future exist simultaneously. All our yesterdays and all our tomorrows exist concurrently with the present, and the world we know and the perceptions that we have of it are merely illusion. Then the world, the here and now, and all that we regard as real are limited, and the mode of cosmic dust that we inhabit is that and nothing more. Yet time itself endures, whether there's someone around to mark its passage or not. When we use poetic phrases like till the end of time, what we really mean is until the end of the ability of thinking beings to measure time. For the thing that is time is truly eternal, measured or not. It is we who are ultimately ephemeral, our lifetime stunted and brief, only the star stuff of which we're made and the time that passes in its presence perpetuate. A quarter century ago, I set upon writing Infinite Worlds, the fantastic visions of science fiction art, at the request of the editorial and marketing people at Analog Magazine. Their initial thought was to exploit the rights they'd retained since the magazine began publication in 1930 by creating a book about the art of astounding/analog. Yet it was at a time when there had not been a publication that presented a credible overview of the rich body of art that the science fiction field had generated. Without the context, I felt that a book about the art of astounding/analog would seem slight and incomplete. I was quick to point out to the folks at Analog that unless it was their intention to produce a book with limited appeal and meager sales prospects, they needed to think beyond the art at hand to the broader scope of what had been created over the relatively short history of science fiction literature. That such a goal was attainable given the brief lifespan of the field. Certainly we could connect science fictional ideas to numerous philosophers and writers over centuries, but from a practical standpoint, the origins of the genre had only taken root with the Industrial Revolution, when there was a consistent framework of basic scientific beliefs that were universally accepted and shared. Even at that, SF stories had not blossomed into a full-blown genre, with common narrative themes and a rich visual vocabulary, until the dawn of the pulp magazines in the late 19th century, and with the founding of the world's first all-science fiction magazine, Amazing Stories, in 1926. At the time I was writing Infinite Worlds, although there had been some previous books devoted to the genre's artwork, these books had been written by authors and editors who had no particular background in the visual arts. The works that they selected for reproduction were, for the most part, chosen based on how much the authors liked the stories they illustrated, and little attempt was made to evaluate the works from the standpoint of their artistic merits, other than to connect them to the descriptions provided by the authors of the original stories. To their credit, some of these writers had acknowledged that Frank R. Paul's work was garish and crude, but rather than being dismissive of his art, they were quick to point out that he'd been among the first artists to successfully map out the basic iconography of the genre during its infancy and had thus made extraordinary contributions to the field's visual content. And in this observation, they were absolutely correct. But the task of writing a critical survey of science fiction art would first necessitate establishing a framework of aesthetic ideas. The undertaking grew so daunting that I realized early on that I would be unable to meet that objective, not in a single volume at any rate. Instead, I came to regard Infinite Worlds as my love letter to an art form which I have dedicated my entire professional life. I did hope that my efforts might spur some serious debate and spawn a fair body of critical, analytical works that would place the significance of the art form where it rightfully belongs, alongside the best examples of the literature that it illustrates. While there have been a great many books written about SF art since, we're still a long way from fully acknowledging its merits and examining its shortcomings. To my mind, well-conceived and executed science fiction drawings and paintings are capable as much of a sense of wonder as the best stories the field has yet produced, and then some. The pictures are the seducers. They dawn in the potential readers, and they go where words cannot. You don't have to read a science fiction story to conjure a mental image of a robot, ray gun, or any of a few dozen other common gadgets described in the literature that don't yet exist, simply because you've seen them depicted in countless works of art. Over the years, I've been approached by a number of times by publishers to write updated editions and companion volumes to Infinite Worlds, but I've steadfastly declined to do so. It dawned on me not long after its publication, in 1997, that my real mission in life was to create art rather than to merely talk about it. And then Adam Rowe came along, asked me to include my work in his book, asked me to write his foreword, and approached me with an outline which seemed both credible and well-informed. And with a respectable list of artists to be included, had the moment finally come for serious reflection of the art of the science fiction genre. I've learned from practical experience that a single book cannot be all things to all people. When Infinite Worlds came out, I started receiving letters from readers who wondered why one artist or another had not been included. Well, the simple answer is this. Publishers are in business to make money, and no publisher in his right mind would publish the 10,000-page book that would provide the credible overview that the field so sorely needs. Infinite Worlds was sold on the basis of profiling 35 top artists in this specialty. In the end, there were 108, and still so many deserving artists were excluded. So it cannot be just one book to satisfy that immense itch for an understanding of science fiction art, but many, and this volume will almost certainly be one for the ages. A small but vital step toward the acknowledgement and understanding of what science fiction art is and what it means. Mr. Rowe is wise to have set his sights on a relatively narrow sampling of cover art from the 70s and 80s in order to do his subject fair justice. From my perspective, the golden age of science fiction literature dawned and endured from the late 30s to the late 50s. The golden age of sci-fi art came somewhat later, and roughly in the time frame that Mr. Rowe has laid out for Worlds Beyond Time. But that I had been as smart as he at my time, and he has exhaustively interviewed as many of the artists who worked during that period as still survive, so that you may learn from their own words of their efforts in visual problem solving that have attracted so many millions of readers to the sci-fi genre. I wish this young man every possible success. May this book be among the first of many to draw attention to one of the true yet largely undiscovered treasures of human thought. All great works of art, written, drawn, sung, or otherwise, aspire to remind us of our greater worth, our fundamental humanity. What better dreams might we have than dreams of a brighter and better tomorrow? Vincent D. Fate. Ever since Mary Shelley's monster was brought to life by a lightning strike, science fiction has shambled and star jumped its way into the collective imagination. Today, the genre is more popular than ever, from Jurassic World to the future tech gadgets of Mission Impossible, to science fiction's do-gooder cousin, the superhero genre. It's tough to find a blockbuster that isn't steeped in sci-fi. Plenty of ink has been spilled over sci-fi's golden age in the first half of the 20th century, and for good reason. It was an era of massive innovation and change that set the standard for all sci-fi to come. But the 40s and 50s were for sci-fi storytelling, and the 70s and 80s were for the genre's cover art. This art boom was driven by two factors: a thriving paperback industry and the general public's increased sci-fi savvy. The economics of sci-fi writing had shifted, and paperback publishers that had gotten into science fiction in the early 50s by the 1960s had begun paying more than their magazine counterparts, spurring authors to shift markets. This diaspora resulted in more science fiction books being published in 1970 alone than in any 5-year span in the 50s. All those novels needed fresh, attention-grabbing covers. Abstract and surreal covers dominated in the 60s, drawing inspiration from the swooping figures and tripping tableaus of maverick artist Richard M. Powers. Near the end of the decade, sales dipped, and a new editor-mandated style took over. Crisp images of spaceships and landscapes, with bold, bright colors to ensure audiences' eyes popped. These audiences were also hitting the cinema, their understanding of sci-fi evolving in line with the film genre's shift from monster movies to more elevated films like 68's 2001: A Space Odyssey and 77's Star Wars. Thanks to the moon landing, space exploration had gone mainstream, and the general population was ready for functional starships and sweeping sci-fi vistas. Book publishers were ready to deliver them. Science fiction cover art matured with time. In early decades, the pulp magazines were dominated by lurid adventure motifs, rather than wonder or exploration for its own sake. Robots and aliens were always evil, and the best response was always to cower in fear or grab a ray gun. Super scientist heroes went bare-chested on alien planets, where they might meet alien life in two forms: inexplicably buxom space ladies or little green men. In other words, heavy on the fiction, light on the science, and focused on figures in action. One artist, Frank R. Paul, broke the mold in the 1920s and 30s. His day job was architectural drafting, and he envisioned images like hovering blimps with tractor beams or a dome over New York City. The art quality left a little to be desired, but the iconography Paul codified: underwater explorers, human-eating plants, future Ice Age apocalypses, dinosaurs fighting laser rays, became the foundation for the visual language of science fiction in the decades to come. Other artists planted more seeds for trends that flourished in the 70s. Virgil Finlay's stipples and cross-hatching brought a variety of textures to black and white interior art, while Jack Gong stood out for vibrant primary colors on his stylized 1950s covers, and the fast, dependable Ed Emshwiller brought a sense of humor. Astronomical artist Chesley Bonstall illustrated for the likes of Collier's and Life magazine rather than the pulps, but his beautiful planetary landscapes deeply influenced the next generation of science fiction artists. Across the 70s and 80s, the still-growing paperback market swirled, all the best influences of past decades together. Chris Foss's ornate weather-beaten spaceships could be found besides John Berkey's abstracted atmospheric vessels. While artists like Michael Whelan and Frank Frazetta focused on the human figure, Paul Laird's landscapes channeled 60s surrealism, while other artists leaned into scientific verisimilitude, as in Wayne Barlow's Alien Biology, Sid Mead's Vehicle Design, and David A. Hardy's Bonestell-esque space art. In all cases, the attention to detail and craft were a step above what had come before. Those visuals live on today. Pick a sci-fi blockbuster, game, or cartoon from the decade since, and it likely has traces of the retro cover art its creators grew up with. Whether a realistically shabby space station or a vividly colored space-time wormhole. This book serves as my manifesto. 70s era science fiction cover art is the ultimate wellspring of imagination that we're drinking from to this day. Percolating through our consciousness until it has become inseparable from how we perceive modern science fiction. Sure, there's the big franchises like Star Wars and Dune, both of which are going strong, but retro sci-fi style turns up in new blockbusters as well. From Marvel's Chris Voss-powered space operas to Avatar, which flipped Roger Dean's art portfolio upside down and shook it loose for floating rock landscapes. Art director Grant Duncan, explicitly inspired by Foss's saturated colors, made sure the groundbreaking 2016 procedural video game No Man's Sky stayed away from the color black whenever possible. It's impossible to dip into psychedelia, vibrant colors, or gonzo mad science today without hearkening back to the grubby paperback cover art from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. In my unvarnished opinion, 70s sci-fi art is the peak of artistic achievement. I've heard good things about the Renaissance, but that's a manifesto for you, so turn down that background hum of mundane daily life thoughts in your head, turn up the childlike sense of wonder, and open up your brain to a powerful universe of half-century-old sci-fi art. So in the top left, this Chesley Bonestell was first published in the December 1948 issue of Pick magazine. Although the color version seen here didn't make it to print until 1964's Beyond the Solar System collection. The scene is set on a fictional alien planet roughly 3,240 million miles away from the red supergiant Antares, which dominates the skyline. Despite lacking a clearly defined surface, as is the norm for other red supergiant stars, the fine detail and striking colors would fit right in on a 70s cover. 2. In the top right, Frank R. Paul's covers led Asimov and Clark to pick up their first sci-fi magazines and inspired an 8-year-old Ray Bradbury. Artist Frank Kelly Freas has called Paul the first illustrator to realize there is a difference between science fiction and mere fantasy. This is his 1927 Amazing Stories Annual #1 cover, depicting Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mastermind of Mars. And in the bottom, Worlds of If was a successful science fiction magazine owned by the same company as the more well-known Galaxy magazine since 1959. It boasted stellar cover art, right up until it was merged with Galaxy in 1974. An occasional contributor, Douglas Chaffee, painted this one for the August 1968 issue. Portrays a trope common in older magazines. Explorers on an alien planet, but packed with fascinating colors and detail, from the rich cave-like shipwreckage to the sensibly single-file expedition to the bizarre flora. Or is it fauna? Alright, so that is the time we have left. So, well, I'm not sure if we'll continue with this tomorrow or get back to Dagger Heart, but either way, looks like the next section we'll be looking at this here is the abstract, surreal, and otherworldly